The air in the federal courtroom was cold and sterile, a heavy silence broken only by the rustle of expensive legal papers. I sat in the back row, a ghost in a simple black suit, deliberately forgettable. Across the room I saw her, Megan, my sister, the woman who had always shone so brightly, leaving me in the shadows. She leaned over to her high-priced lawyer, a smug little smirk playing on her lips as she glanced in my direction. The look was one I knew well, a signature cocktail of pity and amusement. The judge, a stern-faced colonel with eyes that seemed to see right through you, called the room to attention. His gaze swept past the lawyers, past Megan, and landed directly on me. "Before we proceed," he announced, his voice echoing with absolute authority in the chamber, "the court formally acknowledges the presence of the Senior Department of Defense observer for this matter." He let the words hang in the air, a deliberate, heavy pause that drew every eye. "Her report will be entered into the permanent record for the Pentagon's review." The colonel then fixed his gaze on me once more. "Welcome, Brigadier General Claire Carter." Megan's smirk didn't just fade, it shattered. I saw the color drain from her face, her mouth falling open in a perfect silent O of uncomprehending shock. It was the look of someone whose entire worldview had just been detonated by 5 simple words. My mind flashed back to a dinner, just 1 month before. The house was loud with my family's laughter, smelling of my mother's Sunday pot roast. Megan was holding court at the head of the table, complaining about a bureaucratic nightmare her company was facing. She was being investigated for systemic fraud on a massive defense contract, but she spoke of it like it was an inconvenient traffic ticket. "It's just a bunch of pencil-pushing idiots who've never had a real job," she scoffed. And my father, a man who measured worth in job titles and bonuses, nodded in solemn agreement. Then her eyes, sharp and dismissive, landed on me. "What do you think, Jess?" "Oh right, you wouldn't know." The familiar sting landed right on target, another drop in an ocean of casual dismissals. "How's that little government data entry job going? Still mad you couldn't even hack it through basic training?" The family offered their usual polite, complicit chuckles. I felt the old weight of it. This insult, standing on the shoulders of the time they forgot my graduation, the birthday checks always made out to her, the endless praise for her life, while mine remained a footnote. I kept my face a perfect mask of calm, my hands still in my lap. But under the table, my thumb was slowly scrolling down the screen of my phone. I wasn't looking at social media or texting a friend. I was reading a classified preliminary brief from the Inspector General's office, the light illuminating paragraphs of damning evidence against her firm. The subject line was clear: Project Nightingale, Vertex Innovations. That was Megan's company. She thought she was mocking the black sheep, the quiet family failure. She had no idea she was talking to the wolf at her door. She laughed, thinking she was just landing another cheap shot. She had no idea she was confessing the details of her felony to the very person the DOD would eventually assign to oversee her prosecution. To understand the silent checkmate that was about to unfold, you have to understand the 2 lives I had been living for over a decade. To understand the gap between the person they saw and the person I had become, you have to go back about 5 years. My parents' house was packed for a party celebrating Megan, who had just been made vice president at her tech firm. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and catered food. Laughter echoed off the walls as Megan, my sister, the family's brilliant star, moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations with practiced ease. My father followed her like a planet orbiting its sun, beaming with a pride he never showed me. I felt like a ghost at the feast, a piece of furniture they all navigated around. This was her world, and I was just a guest in it. I saw the internal ledger flash in my mind. All the times my own smaller victories were met with a polite nod before the conversation immediately shifted back to Megan. The debate trophies I won, the academic scholarships I earned, they were all footnotes in the grand epic of her life. Gathering my courage, I found my mother, Carol, a woman who treated family harmony like a fragile antique that must be preserved at all costs. I told her my news, my voice barely a whisper against the party's noise. I'd been accepted into a highly competitive advanced leadership program with the government, a huge step in my career. She patted my hand, her eyes already scanning the room for someone more important to talk to. "That's nice, dear," she said, her smile tight and distant. "Just try to find something you can stick with this time." The comment hung in the air between us, heavy and sharp. It was a direct reference to the family's core myth about me, the story they all told themselves. The story was that I, Claire, had tried to join the army right after college but had washed out of basic training. They imagined I couldn't handle the physical demands or the mental toughness. It was a convenient fiction I had created myself, a necessary cover to enter a direct commission program into the JAG Corps. I never corrected them. I just let them believe I was a failure. Now, contrast that memory with my reality a few days later. I stood in a secure, soundproofed room deep within the Pentagon, a place so sterile you could hear your own heartbeat. The only smell was that of clean air and old coffee. I was in my full Class A uniform, the single star of a Brigadier General gleaming on each shoulder. Before me sat the Judge Advocate General of the entire U.S. Army, a 3-star general, flanked by a panel of senior colonels whose medal racks told stories of careers spent in service to the nation. There was no small talk here, no polite laughter. There was only the mission. I was delivering a briefing on the legal precedents for invoking the Uniform Code of Military Justice against civilian contractors committing fiscal fraud on foreign soil, specifically within a declared theater of operations. Pursuant to Article 134, I said, my voice calm and steady, the actions of the Vertex contractors can be interpreted as prejudicial to good order and discipline. The critical infrastructure they compromised directly impacted mission readiness. I wasn't just a lawyer. I was a legal strategist, outlining a course of action that carried immense weight. My words weren't suggestions. They were foundational arguments that would shape military policy. The 3-star general leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine. He listened, not with the distracted air of my mother, but with an intense, focused silence. The colonels took notes, their faces grim and professional. When I finished, the room was quiet for a long moment. The general finally nodded, a single sharp gesture of affirmation that was worth more than 1,000 parties. "Your analysis is sound, Carter," he said. "The chain of command will be briefed. Proceed with establishing the preliminary framework." In that room, my rank was absolute. My expertise was unquestioned. I was not the family footnote. I was a general officer in the United States Army. That duality became painfully clear during a phone call with my mother a few weeks before Megan's trial. I'd tried, in vague terms, to explain that I was working on a very important project that required all of my focus. She cut me off, her voice laced with that familiar, weary sigh she reserved for my life. "That's great, honey, but you can't imagine the pressure your sister is under. Her case is so incredibly complex, and these lawyers cost a fortune." She took a breath, and I knew what was coming next. "You know, Megan is the one who really has to deal with the real world. We all need to be there for her right now." The real world? I thought of the secure rooms, the classified briefings, the life and death consequences of my decisions. Her words didn't even make me angry anymore. They just made me tired. It was the tired feeling of knowing you are fundamentally misunderstood by the one person who is supposed to see you most clearly. For 15 years, I let them believe their story. I thought protecting them from my world was a form of love. But sitting at that table, I realized they didn't respect love. They only respected rank and consequence. So I decided I would finally speak to them in the only language they understood, the language of the law. Leaving my parents' house that night, something inside me had shifted. The years of frustration, of being invisible, of swallowing insults. It didn't curdle into rage. It crystallized into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. For the first time, I felt no emotion about it at all. My goal wasn't revenge. That was too messy, too emotional, too much a part of their world. My goal was simply an unimpeachable clarification of fact, delivered in a forum where feelings were irrelevant and the rules were absolute. I would not argue with them. I would not confess my secret. I would use the system I had mastered to present them with a truth they could not deny. The next morning, I was in the office of my commanding officer, Colonel Matthews, a man who believed procedure was the wall that stood between order and chaos. I stood at parade rest before his desk, and laid out the strategic importance of the Vertex Innovations fraud case, never once mentioning my personal connection. I spoke about the implications for national security, the compromised supply chains, and the dangerous precedent it would set for future defense contracts. I was no longer the quiet daughter. I was a senior officer advising my superior on a matter of military importance. The civil trial will only address the financial damages, sir, I explained, my voice even. But the operational impact falls squarely within our purview. To protect the department's interests for any subsequent UCMJ action, I strongly recommend we assign a senior JAG officer to act as a direct DoD observer for the federal trial. This was the key. By making it about protocol, about preserving the military's rights, my presence would not be a choice, but a professional necessity. It was a clean, strategic move that was entirely by the book. He steepled his fingers, his eyes boring into me, weighing the logic. Colonel Matthews nodded slowly. Your assessment is correct, General. The integrity of our procurement process is paramount. He looked down at the brief, then back at me. Given your unparalleled expertise on this case file, who do you recommend for the assignment? I let a deliberate, measured pause hang in the air for a moment. This was the point of no return. To ensure absolute impartiality, Colonel, I replied, my voice betraying nothing. I will volunteer for the assignment myself. He saw it not as a trap being set, but as a leader taking on a difficult duty. He picked up his pen. The assignment was approved. My travel orders were cut. Megan's lawyers prepared to fight the U.S. Attorney's Office, thinking that was their only opponent. They had no idea they were walking into a jurisdiction where a different set of rules and a different kind of authority was already waiting for them. The day of the trial, I walked into the United States District Court alone. The room was designed to intimidate, all dark wood, cold marble, and ceilings so high they seemed to swallow sound. I chose a seat in the public gallery, just another anonymous face in a simple black suit, and I waited. Soon, my family arrived. They didn't walk, they made an entrance. My father, my mother, and my other sibling moved as a unit, dressed in expensive suits that screamed of wealth and confidence. They were a phalanx of support for the golden child, Megan. She spotted me from across the room, sitting by myself. I saw her lean towards my mother, a contemptuous little whisper curling her lips. Even from a distance, I knew the words. Look who showed up to see me win. My mother's gaze flickered towards me, not with anger, but with something far worse, pity. It was the same look she'd given me my whole life. The look that said, "Oh, you poor dear, still trying to keep up." I held her gaze, my face a perfect blank, my pulse as steady as a drumbeat. They saw me as a spectator to Megan's success, completely oblivious that they were all actors in my theater. The trial began, and the room fell silent. The U.S. attorney, a sharp man with a voice like polished steel, laid out the case. He didn't speak of simple accounting errors or corporate missteps. He spoke of massive systemic fraud, of falsified quality reports, of Project Nightingale, a critical defense initiative. The air grew colder as he detailed how the faulty equipment supplied by Megan's company had not just cost the government money, but had actively compromised the operational security of deployed military assets. This wasn't just about greed anymore. This was about soldiers in the field. To drive the point home, the attorney paused and looked towards the judge. This was a profound betrayal of trust, he stated clearly. To that end, the Department of Defense has taken a direct and personal interest in these proceedings. A murmur went through the courtroom. Megan's lead counsel, who had been lounging with an air of relaxed confidence, sat bolt upright. He knew, in that instant, that the game had changed. The civilian world of financial penalties was gone. The military world of hard consequences had just entered the room. That's when it happened. The judge, a man named Colonel Jennings, whose reputation for unbending fairness was legendary in the JAG Corps, looked up from his papers. He peered over his glasses, his eyes scanning the gallery until they found mine. The entire courtroom followed his gaze. The court will now formally acknowledge the DoD's senior representative, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. He cleared his throat. Brigadier General Claire Carter, on behalf of the court, we welcome you. He let the rank hang in the air for a full 3 seconds. Your presence here, he continued, giving me a crisp, respectful nod, underscores the seriousness of this matter. A tidal wave of shock ripped through the room. I saw Megan's lawyer turn to stare, his face suddenly pale, his million-dollar swagger gone. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with a confusion so deep it was almost comical. And I saw my father, the man who for years had boasted about his own 2 years as a corporal in the 60s, jolt as if he'd been hit by a taser. He involuntarily started to rise from his seat, a forgotten reflex of military discipline kicking in at the presence of a general officer, before he seemed to fold in on himself and collapse back into the bench. But my eyes were on Megan. Her smug confidence didn't just break, it completely disintegrated. It was like watching a marble statue crumble into dust in a matter of seconds. Her mind was frantically trying to connect the two images. Jess, the family failure who washed out of basic, and this brigadier general being formally recognized by a federal judge. The connection wouldn't compute. Her reality was broken, and she had nothing to replace it with. The woman who always had an answer for everything couldn't even speak. My sister had spent her life trying to make me feel small. In the end, it only took 5 words from a federal judge to show her she was in a room where she was, finally and completely, outranked. The trial was, for all intents and purposes, a disaster for Megan. With the weight of the DoD's official interest now pressing down on the proceedings, her defense crumbled. The evidence was overwhelming, and my presence in the courtroom served as a silent, constant reminder of the gravity of her actions. When the jury foreman read the word guilty, a strange quiet fell over the room. It wasn't the sound of victory, just the sound of a conclusion. A chapter, closed. Megan made a small, broken sound, and my mother began to sob quietly. My father just stared blankly ahead, a man hollowed out by a truth he couldn't comprehend. I stood up, my movements deliberate. I didn't look at them. I didn't offer a glance of pity or a spark of triumph. To look at them would be to re-engage, to acknowledge that their reaction still mattered. Instead, I turned and walked toward the heavy courtroom doors. As I pushed one open, a young Air Force captain standing in the hallway immediately snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight. He held the door for me. "General," he said, his voice crisp with a respect that was genuine and uncomplicated. Through the closing door, I saw my family for a final moment, huddled together, stunned and suddenly invisible, watching as I was afforded the deference they never knew I was owed. They were left alone in the hallway, citizens of a world that no longer belonged to them. 6 months later, my world was defined by the view from my office window at the Pentagon. From here, I could see the Washington Monument piercing the sky, a constant reminder of the history and responsibility that came with my position. The polished wooden plaque on my door read, Brigadier General J. Carter, Deputy Judge Advocate General. The title wasn't a weapon or a shield anymore, it was simply who I was. My days were no longer spent navigating the emotional minefield of my family, but in rooms like this one, leading briefings with my real team. I looked around the long mahogany table in my adjoining conference room. It was surrounded by some of the sharpest legal minds in the military. Majors and colonels, men and women who had served in conflict zones and advised on matters of international law. When I spoke, they listened with a focused intensity, not because they had to, but because they respected the competence and the experience behind the words. We debated, we strategized, we worked to uphold a system we all believed in. There was no golden child here, no invisible one. There was only rank, which was earned, and respect, which was mutual. This was my family now. A meritocracy built on duty and honor, a family I had chosen and which had chosen me back. One afternoon, as I was reviewing a complex appellate court brief, my personal phone buzzed on the corner of my desk. I glanced at the screen. It was a long wall of text from my mother, the first I'd received in months. I picked up the phone and read it. It was a rambling, disjointed monologue full of excuses, justifications, and talk of how difficult things had been for them. It was a masterpiece of self-pity, a final attempt to recenter the narrative around their pain. The last 2 sentences were what truly stood out. Megan is so sorry for everything. We are all so proud of you now. When can we see you? So proud of me. Now. Now that the rank was undeniable, now that my success was public, I read the words, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not satisfaction, not even the ghost of old pain. The internal ledger I had kept for so long was finally, completely blank. The accounts were settled. My peace was no longer a currency they could trade in. With a steady finger, I held down on the message thread and tapped the archive button. The notification disappeared. I was free. My sister always said I couldn't hack it in the real world. I just learned to master one she didn't know existed. If you've ever had your success ignored by the people who should have celebrated it most, tell us your story below. Here, your rank is always recognized.